holding at the Mishnah on 71. Good morning, Daddy. We're holding at the Mishnah on 71b2. Okay? So,
let me get to it.
71b2, the Mishnah, Ayin Aleph Amid Beis, the Mishnah. We now return back to having discussed yesterday the other sacrifices, the Chagiga, the Shami Simcha. We come back to Korban Pesach. In dealing with Korban Pesach, we have to remember this following rule. On Shabbos, like this year, when Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos, the truth is on Shabbos, the Beis HaMikdash is very quiet. Outside of the Korban Sibors, the communal sacrifices of the two Tamids, the Tamid of the morning and the Tamid of the afternoon, and of the two extra Musafim. Musaf means extra, Moisif, to add. So there were two, outside of the two communal Tamids of the morning and the afternoon, and the communal Musafim, the extra ones that were brought because it was Shabbos. All other sacrifices were not brought on Shabbos because all other sacrifices are not Doiche Shabbos. Only those communal sacrifices that were established by time, Hazaman Kavua, the Zaman established the time of it. That's the Korban Tamid and the two Musafim. The one exception to the rule is, like this year, when Yud Daled Nisan, when Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos, because the Korban Pesach is a mitzvah saseh, shechayiv kares, is the rare situation where you have a positive commandment that if you do not bring it, you are chayiv kares, you're chayiv to be cut off. We say that it is doiche Shabbos. But clearly, it's only doiche Shabbos if you bring the Korban Pesach correctly. But if you botch it up and you mess it up, obviously that's going to be problematic. There are two ways to botch it up, and this is what you have to get your hands around to understand the following, the next Amid of Gemara. There is Tohe Bidvar Halacha, a mistake in Halacha. So in other words, a person went ahead and he labeled the animal, he labeled the sheep a Korban Pesach. And then he got to it and he said, you know what? I have to bring a shlomim. I got to bring another carbon. I'm changing my classification, even though I assigned it the name Pesach, I'm changing its classification to shlomim. So he deliberately changes its classification on the Shabbos, but thinks that just like I was allowed to bring this sheep on Shabbos, because I'm allowed to bring the Korban Pesach on Shabbos, so if I change its name, I'm also still allowed to bring the sheep on Shabbos, which of course he's not allowed to, but he makes a mistake in halacha. Toh behalacha. So he takes something that was labeled a Pesach, he changes its name to a shlomim, but thinks that just like I was allowed to bring the Pesach on Shabbos, so too I was allowed to bring the shlomim on Shabbos, which of course he was not. Then there is toh bidvar mitzvah. You make a mistake in the doing of a mitzvah. This is the flip side. He had an animal set aside for all other zavachim, a shalomim. He knew that you can't bring a shalomim on Shabbos. And so he says, oops, today's the 14th of Nisan. You know what? I'll switch its name from a shalomim to a Pesach, and I will bring it as my Korban Pesach. So he needs to bring it as a Korban Pesach, which is the mitzvah sayon, the commandment of the day. So he makes a mistake thinking he's allowed to do this on Shabbos. That's called Torah b'dvar mitzvah. Therefore, there's two different things, whether it's Torah b'dvar halacha or Torah b'dvar a mitzvah. Once you have this understanding, it pretty much makes a lot of sense. Says the Mishnah. Ha-Pesach shechotu shaloi lishmoi b'Shabbos. If one set aside an animal for a Pesach, And then ultimately on Shabbos, he switches his mind and he decides he's going to bring it for a shlomim, for a shlomim. Chayav alav chatas. He's chayav chatas because he made a mistake in halacha. He said what? I know today is Yudalit, but I want to bring the shlomim. So this animal that I set aside for Pesach, which is on Shabbos, I'm going to bring it as a shlomim, thinking that since he was allowed to bring this animal, if it had remained the Pesach, he was allowed to bring it on Shabbos. He said, therefore, if I switch its name, it's the same animal, I'm allowed to bring it for the shlomim. That is a toy b'dvar halacha. He made a mistake in halacha. He thought that just because he changed the name, I'm still allowed to bring it on Shabbos. Therefore, it's a shoygeg, and he has to go ahead and bring a chatos. V'shar kol zavachim. But if he had set aside this animal for all other sacrifices, for an example, a shalom, which he knew that you were not allowed to bring it on Shabbos, and now he goes and he says, oops, it's Erev Shabbos like this year, and I need to bring a Pesach, so he switches its name from a shalomim to a Pesach. Shishachtam l'shem Pesach, he shechs it for a Pesach, so now his mistake was b'devar mitzvah. He wanted to do the mitzvah of the day of Korban Pesach, and a Korban Pesach is allowed to be brought on Shabbos. The problem was that this behemoth was initially labeled for a shlomim. So now the Mishnah says, when it's a Torah b'devar mitzvah, in a royin chayiv, if the animal was an animal that was not suitable for a Pesach, it was a female, it was 2 years old. Remember, a Korban Pesach has to come from a male sheep, and it has to be within its first year of life. It can't be from the second year of life. So if this animal was a female, or was in the second year of life, we are in 71b3, right? Then in that case, Yechayiv, the Imroyin, now we're on 71b3, Imroyin, but if it was a male within the first year, so that in reality it was a behemoth that was worthy to become a Pesach. Its only problem was it was originally labeled as a shlomim. So he went ahead and he switched. He said, I know I'm not allowed to bring a shlomim on Pesach, on Shabbos, but I'm allowed to bring a Korban Pesach on Shabbos, so I'm going to switch its name, and I'm going to switch its name, and I'm going to bring it, the Korban Pesach, on Shabbos, which of course he's really not allowed to do because it was originally labeled for something else. But he thinks I've now straightened it out and called it a Pesach, and a Pesach I'm allowed to bring on Shabbos, and it was royan, it was a zachar, it was a male, and it was 1 year old. Says this Tano, right, being royan, hey, but if it's right, but if they're royan, now we come to a dispute. Rabbi Eliezer Mechayev Chatas. Rabbi Eliezer says, I don't care. The fact is, you made a mistake. Whether the mistake was in halacha, which everybody agrees, you have to Mechayev Chatas, you have to bring a sin offering, or whether it's you made a mistake in the mitzvah, Torah b'dvar mitzvah, when you wanted to switch a shlomim into a Pesach, because you thought I'm allowed to bring that kind of carbon on Shabbos. He says it doesn't make a difference. You made a mistake, you all have to bring a sin offering. Rabbi Yeshua pointed, Rabbi Yeshua says no. When you Torah b'dvar mitzvah, then you're off the hook. You don't have to bring a sin offering. Only if you make a mistake in halacha, where it started as a Pesach, which was allowed to be brought on Shabbos, and you switched it to other kabbalas, to a shlomim, which you're not allowed to bring, and you thought I'm still allowed to bring, that's no good. But where you started with something that was not that was a shlomim, and you switched it to a Pesach, which is today's mitzvah, which is what, and the Pesach normally is allowed to be brought on Shabbos, that's a Torah b'dvar mitzvah, says Rabbi Yeshua Potter. Amalai Rabbi Eliezer, so now they go back and forth. Rabbi Eliezer says, I don't understand how you could say that. Ma ima Pesach shu motul lishmoi. Now a Pesach, which is the unique carbon, the unique sacrifice, that it does doiches Shabbos. It pushes off the Shabbos. When you slaughter it for its own sake, when it's Yud Daled Nisan, you bring the carbon Pesach in the afternoon, even if it's Shabbos like this year. And the halacha is Sheshina Shemai. But if you switch its name, if you designate this animal to originally a Pesach, you now turn it into a Shlomim in your mind, right? You're chayiv. Everybody agrees when you're Torah b'dvar halacha, you're chayiv zevachim. All other sacrifices, shehem is surin lishma. That means if I have a shlomim and I want to bring it as a shlomim, I'm not allowed to bring it on Shabbos because a shlomim and all other sacrifices are not doicha the Shabbos. Sheshinon es shemam, if you change its name from a zebach to a pesach, of course you should be chayiv. If madach in its original state, you're not allowed to bring it on Shabbos. Certainly here, if you switch its name, you're not allowed to bring it on Shabbos. For this, Amalai Rabbi Yeshua says, no, lie. In Pesach, when you changed its name from Pesach, which was mutter to be doicha Shabbos and bring on Shabbos, you switched it to a shlomim, which is usher to bring on Shabbos. You're not allowed to bring it on Shabbos. You want it by your zavachim, which starts off as something that you're not allowed to bring on Shabbos, but you switched its name to Pesach, which normally is allowed to be brought on Shabbos. So there it's a little different. In such a case, you're only Torah b'dvar mitzvah. You're Torah b'dvar mitzvah. I'm telling you, you're potter. You don't have to bring a sin offering, right? Amalai Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says absolutely not. Imurei tzivu yechiach. The communal offerings will demonstrate again. On Shabbos, no kabbanis were brought, no sacrifice was brought, except the carbon, the communal offerings of the two tamids, the morning tamid and the afternoon tamid, and the two musafim. By the way, musaf means moisif, to add. The two additional Shabbos kabbanis that have to do with the musaf. That's it. There were only 4 kabbanis brought a whole day. The one at the beginning, one at the end of the Talmud, and then the 2 Musafs. So he says, Amalai Rabbi Eliezer, the Imurei Tzivu Yechiach, those communal offerings that were brought on Shabbos will prove my point that we don't care whether it's a Torah b'dvar halacha or a Torah b'dvar, or you made a mistake in the Torah b'dvar mitzvah. Either way, you have to bring a chatos, a sin offering. Shehein mutar lishma. The 2 Talmuds and the 2 Musafim obviously are mutter to bring on Shabbos. They're doicha Shabbos because the zman is kabua them. The time establishes in them that they have to be brought always, every Shabbos. So if you bring it for its name, the name of a Talmud or the name of the Musaf, of course you could bring it on Shabbos. V'hashoichet lishma chayiv. But one who takes other kabbanis. In other words, if somebody takes a shlomim and says, "Ooh, I'm going to use this shlomim to bring the musaf of Shabbos," or the Talmud, what happens? He's chayiv. He has to bring a carbon chatos. He has to bring a sin offering. So we see that slaughtering something for the sake of something that's permissible forces you to bring a chatos. So how could you, Rabbi Yeshua, say that if I take a shlomim on Erev Pesach that was on Shabbos and I change its name to a Pesach and I bring it, so that only I made a mistake, Torah b'dvar mitzvah, I'm potter. You see that I'm not. Amalei Rabbi Yeshua loy. How you can't bring proof from there. If you're going to bring a point of view that how many kabbanis are there of the communal kabbanis? 4. Oh. That's it. 2 tamids and 2 musafs. No way you're going to mess it up. Everybody knows there's 4. That's it. So if you want to go ahead and bring, there's a limit to what's done here. That's the kitzvah. They have a limit. There's only a limit to the number of carbon civil communal offerings. So therefore, there's no excuse that you went ahead and botched up.
You shouldn't make a mistake, yeah.
Right. Jeff, remember what you asked me yesterday about the carbon Pesachs? Well, how did they handle the millions and millions of carbon Pesachs that happen Erev Pesach? This is our Mishnah right here. How could you talk about the carbon Pesach which has no limit? There were millions of kabbanis brought in a short period of time. Literally, in about 4 hours, they brought millions and millions of kabbanis. Which, by the way, as we discussed yesterday with Jeffrey, that Henry Ford did not create the assembly line. The Kahanim on Erev Pesach, the Gemara talks about it all over, was the world's greatest assembly line. They literally assembled It was a non-stop assembly line for about 4 hours, and they covered millions of kabbanis while wading in knee-deep blood, right, throughout the afternoon of the Yud Dal and Nisan. Amid Hashem, this year, when Mashiach comes and it's Erev Pesach, it's Shabbos, we're going to get the pleasure of seeing this. Personally, because you're not going to be able to watch it on Zoom, you're going to have to go and see it. Anyways, so here we go. Now, so this was the machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Eliezer says if you make a mistake, I don't care what your mistake is, whether it's in halacha or in a mitzvah, you've got to bring a karban chatas. Rabbi Yeshua says if you make a mistake in halacha, I agree, you've got to bring a karban chatas, but if you make a mistake while doing a mitzvah, you think you're doing a mitzvah, I switch my shalomim to a Pesach, and I brought it on Shabbos, thinking that was the right thing to do, right? That's being in the action of doing the mitzvah of karban Pesach. You made an aveiro. He says you're potter, you don't have to bring a chatas. Comes Rameir Oimer, Apa shoichet l'shem amurei tzibur potter. He says, I don't care. Even in the case of the communal offerings on Shabbos, of which there are only 4, and really you shouldn't make a mistake, he says, I don't care. Since it's Torah b'devar mitzvah, since you brought your shlomim and you say, I want to bring it for a karban tamid or a karban musaf, which is allowed to be brought on Shabbos, even though he shouldn't have made that mistake because there's only 4 kabbanas, Im Kozer Rameh is the most makel, he's the most lenient. He says, you're off the hook. You don't have to bring a sin offering because you really meant to do it. You made a mistake in the mitzvah of the day. Now the Gemara is the Mishnah goes further.
I was wondering why the Mishnah says Eimurit Tzibur. Why Eimurim? You should have said the Korban Tzibur.
Right, I don't have a good answer. My father's asking, the word Eimure usually means the sacrificial fats that are brought up afterwards onto the altar and get burnt on the altar. I really do not know why. I have not seen a good reason why the Mishnah changed its language. But the truth is, this whole Mishnah, in case anybody didn't realize, is very strange. The Mishnah reads like a Gemara. It's very rare that in a Mishnah we have a Kal V'Chayma that goes back and forth, back and forth. This whole Mishnah is strange, to be totally honest. It's not your typical Mishnah that you find. So let's just go a little further here. This one already we learned before many times. Shachtu shaloi la'achloi. If one slaughtered the Pesach for those who cannot eat it, a chayla, somebody who's sick, or somebody that's old and their teeth can no longer bite the meat, shaloi l'menuyah, or for those who are not registered on the karban. Remember we said you could only shecht it for those who are registered on it. La'arei l'mulutameim. So like last night's meeting, you had to register to come into to be part of the meeting. Or for those who are uncircumcised, who are tamei, which are not allowed to eat the karban pesach, because remember the karban pesach is brought for the sake of its eating. Chayiv, you're therefore chayiv achatas if you bring this karban pesach on Shabbos. If you bring it on Shabbos, such a karban pesach is not doiches a Shabbos, does not push off the Shabbos. However, if you hedged your bet, you shechted it, you slaughtered it for the sake of those who could eat it and those who couldn't eat it, for those who are registered on it and those who are not registered on it, for those who are circumcised and those who are not circumcised, for those who are tar and a tamei, potter, you're potter. In fact, you're not potter, the karban is perfectly good. This is again, like my daddy, another place where the language of the Mishnah is strange. It shouldn't use the word potter. The word potter usually means chayiv, you potter from a karban, but it's not something you shouldn't do.
Kosher it should be.
So
the word should have been kosher.
In the Mishnah, in 61A2, where they say almost the same thing, that you can eat it if it's together, it says kosher.
Kosher. I don't know exactly. This whole Mishnah, all its language is strange. You guys are asking a good question. I don't have the answer.
I think I have an answer, because before the Mishnah was talking about something else, but Tod Bar Mitzvah is there. You said Potter and Chayev, so they want to use the same.
I understand that
to keep the symmetry. The
They
symmetry.
use Puzzle and kosher.
Partial and kosher. That's the previous Mishnah says partial and kosher.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, you might be right, but it doesn't answer the question about emurin. Why would you lose the lashon emurin instead of just korban? And why do you have the whole back and forth in the Mishnah instead of having it in the Gemara like you normally have? Yeah, it's a Gemara Mishnah. That's why I'm taking so much time. Because you have to understand this Mishnah takes a half hour. It took me to prepare it a half hour just to understand it. I don't know the answer. It's an interesting Mishnah when you look at it. Shachtu v'nimsa balmum. If one slaughters the Pesach and then he found a mum, a blemish, chayev is chayev v'chatas. You have to understand this. The blemish was on the outside of the sacrifice. Every sacrifice is supposed to be looked over before it is brought. They blew it. The Pesach, if you remember, the Pesach was actually taken 4 days earlier. They took it on Shabbos HaGadol, but they shechted it, they slaughtered it 4 days later. One of the reasons they took it 4 days earlier, because you have to look it over to make sure it doesn't have a blemish. So this was a case of a blemish on the outside. The blemish on the outside, you should have found it. Therefore, and since you didn't do your due diligence, chayev, you brought it on Shabbos and it's not a good korban Pesach, you chayev to bring a chatos. Shachtoi, but if you slaughtered it, nimtza terefa b'seiser, if you found it to be a treifa, that means it has an internal problem. In other words, there was a hole in the lung. Let's use the easiest case. There was a hole in the lung. Potter, you potter. And this is a rule in life. The Torah was not given to angels. You're not expected to do. So for an example, there's this whole controversy about bugs in the water, right? And that you need a filter, you don't. Lehalacha, the Aruch HaShulchan brings it down straight. The Aruch HaShulchan lived in the late 1800s. They already had microscopes. He writes over there, the Torah was not given to Malachim. It's only by Tfiyas Ayin. If you see it, it's a problem. If you can't see it with the human eye, it's not a problem. It's not there. It's not there. So for an example, there's going to be a Gemara where it talks about the gnats. And the Gemara seems to be saying that the gnats are born by poof, yesh me'ayin, by immaculate conception. Okay? And we know that it's not the case. But the answer is, the Gemara is saying, and the Gemara brings on halachos on this, but the answer is because the Gemara is saying with the naked eye, you can't see male and female gnats because they're too small. So therefore, in halacha, guess what? They have the halacha of immaculate conception. It happens like that. Okay? But that's the idea behind this. In our Mishnah, you're potter because an internal blemish is you could have done. Yes, in today's world, why don't you pass it to the X-ray machine, like the airports? Pass the animal to the X-ray machine. Review it beforehand. The answer is you don't have to go to those levels. Imagine if we did go through those levels, the price of kosher meat would be, which is already high, would go through the roof. Jerry can tell you all about this. Exactly. All right. Ends the Mishnah 71b5. I'm sorry that I took so much time on this Mishnah, but without it, I don't see how I could have learned it.
You did very well.
Thank you. If one slaughtered the Pesach, and then after he slaughtered it, it became known that the owners, the guys who registered on it, had withdrawn from it. They went away from it, so there's now nobody registered on the animal. Oisha Mesu, or heaven forbid, those who went ahead and registered on it passed away. We can understand that this past year, unfortunately, how many people passed away between Purim and Pesach. Like I said, I had a Rebbe of mine that called me on March 20th in perfect health. By March 26th, he was already gone from Corona. I had a friend of mine, about 4 years younger than me, who sent me a joke on WhatsApp on March 25th, and that's the last thing I ever got from him. And a week later, he had three children that were his son. So you see over here, Shemesu, that you could register on the Pesach, but there could be an epidemic and people died. But Oy Shenitmu, or they all became Tomei, which invalidates the offering because there's nobody Tahar to bring the offering on. Potter, he's Potter, Bipnei Sheshachat Rishus, because he slaughtered it with permission. He didn't know. You cannot expect it. Once the facts are in place, you can't be expected to think that the facts are going to change behind you. That's not your job. And Rashi literally says it. Look at the last Rashi on the page. Sha'oinisu. He's not simply a shoygeg, inadvertent. Oinis. He's completely, there's no negligence whatsoever. Shaloi hayidei shikain. There's no way for him to know. It wasn't his business to have to go ahead and search into this. He can assume that the facts that he's dealing with are the facts that he's dealing with. Okay, we're on the dot. Ayin Beis. Let's see if we can pick up a little speed here. Maybe. But Maya Skimin, in the first case that we're talking about, right, that where you had something that you had put aside as a Pesach, and then on Shabbos, Erev Pesach, you switched and you decided, I'm going to bring it as a Shlom, otherwise known as Tor B'dvar Halacha. You thought, since I'm allowed to bring the Pesach on Shabbos, so if I switch its name, it's the same animal, I'm just switching its name. So I'm switching its name, I'm also allowed to bring it on Shabbos. That's a Tor B'dvar Halacha. If we're going to say that he made a mistake, he thought that the Pesach he was slaughtering, he actually thought that the Pesach was a Shlomim. It's not that he deliberately switched its name. He said, oh, I made a mistake. He took the animal, he said, oh, this is my Shlomim. He forgot that he had labeled it as a Pesach. If that's the case, are you coming then to tell me, Shamat Mina, you're telling me over here, Akira B'toes, that somebody who uproots the offering's name, the original designation in Arab, Akira Batois, Habi Akira, is called an Akira, is an uprooting, and it invalidates. But if you look at the top Tosfos, the small Tosfos on top, he brings Amari, the Pluktohi, B'techeles, and the Sefes Menachos. In fact, it's an argument, which the Gemara over there does not give it a clear answer. It is not a clarity that just because I do something by accident, inadvertently, it blows the whole carbon. So it says the Gemara, you're right. So the case cannot be where he simply made a mistake and he thought that this carbon was a shlomim. Ella the oiker. Ella, he didn't on purpose. He woke up in the morning, he said, I know it's a Pesach, and I know I'm allowed to bring a Pesach on Shabbos, but you know what, I'm going to switch its name to a shlomim. And since it's the same animal, he thought that I could then bring this on Shabbos.
Yitzhak,
he does it on purpose. Yes.
Yitzhak, are these like self-inflicted admissions that a name was changed?
Yes.
So the person has to come forward. It's up to the person himself to come forward.
Yes. Jeff just made an extraordinarily important thing. The Torah Kedosha works on the trust system. Everything works on the trust system. You are meant to be a straight and honorable person. If you blow it, you have to have the guts to get up and say, to do vidui, to repent. What's the first thing of repenting? To say, al chet, I have sinned. It's exactly right. Jeff, very, very good point here. Very good point. All of this is self-incrimination. And this is weird because usually self-incrimination doesn't work, but that's only in court. In court, as we'll find in those Masechtas, a person cannot, ein other meimitz atzmai rasha. A person is not allowed to testify in himself that he is an evil person, right? In other words, the idea you can't testify for self-incrimination. There's no such thing as, but not even plead the fifth. You just can't. It's not accepted. Even if he gets up and says it in court, it's thrown out. But here it's different. Here you have to say, oops, I blew it. I thought wrong. So in this case, Elo ba'oiker, he went ahead and deliberately changed the name in his mind from a Pesach to a Shlomim, thinking that since I'm allowed to bring this animal on Shabbos, if it's a Pesach, I'm allowed to bring it also as a Shlomim. Says the Gemara, but if that's the case, that the ratio, the beginning is talking where he deliberately switched the name of the Pesach to a Shlomim, Ema Seifo, look at the latter part, Vishar Kol Zabach, all other Zabach, which you're not allowed to bring on Shabbos. So let's say he had a Shlomim. Sheshachtem l'shem Pesach, and he says, oops, today's Erev Pesach, let me switch its name from a Shlomim to a Pesach, let me bring it as the Karban Pesach, which is the mitzvah of the day. He's taught me the mitzvah. He's taught me Shem mitzvah. Right? Im ein royan chayiv, the Mishnah says, if it's not royan, meaning he brings it for people that are not royan, the animal is not royan, it's a female, or it's 2 years old, chayiv, he's chayiv from a carbon, im royan hain, but if it is a male and it's less than 1 year old, Rabbi Eliezer mechayiv chatas, Rabbi Eliezer says, I don't care, you made a mistake, whether it's a mistake in Allah or a mistake in a mitzvah, Yechayev. Rabbi Yeshua pointer. Rabbi Yeshua says, no, if you're doing it in a thing, you pointer. So the Gemara, oiker. But if you're telling me that this Mishnah is talking about where you deliberately do things, so that you deliberately took this Shlomim, and you deliberately changed its name to a Pesach, Mali Royan, Mali Enu Royan. What's the difference? But even Rabbi Yeshua should tell us that it's no good, because you went out of your way to deliberately change its name. If you deliberately change its name, what's the difference in whether it's good for it's a male and within the first year or it's not? It should be chayiv even according to chayiv even according to Rabbi Yeshua, because you did something. You changed its name. Charlie,
we need
okay?
Rabbi Meir here.
We haven't gotten to Rabbi yet. Very good. Charlie recognizes full well that there's somebody in the Mishnah that's completely. Yeah, the Gemara is not letting you do a shortcut.
No, I know. I'm just kidding.
Not happening. Good point, however. It's good to keep that in the back of your head. There's an out. There is an out, but not yet. Right? Mali Ryan, Mali Sheda Ryan. Ela Pshita, you got no choices but to say that the Sefer is Bitua, where he made a mistake. In other words, he labeled it as a Shlomim, but then he woke up and said, oh, today's Erev Pesach. Great. I've got my carbon right here. I got my animal that's right for a carbon Pesach. He forgot that he had originally labeled it as a Shlomim and he brought it as a Pesach.
Made a mistake.
Right. So then you're saying Reisha Ba'oiker, you're saying the first part of the Mishnah, when he switches it from a Pesach to a Shlomim, it's where he deliberately does it, the Sefer B'tai, where he just simply inadvertently does it. Amar Rav Avin. Yep. And sometimes we got Mishnahs like this. Reisha Ba'oiker, the Sefer B'tai. And Ashkech Rabbi Yitzchak, Rabbi Yisrael, Rabbi Avu, Rabbi Yitzchak, Yasitan, Rabbi Avu, the Habikah, the Lusod, the Inchi, who was standing in a crowd of people. Why we had to know this, I don't know. But this is a way they seem to have remembered. They remembered little facts of where people were and all that, to try to set in their heads where things took place and all that, to give it a greater authenticity. I guess that's the
no, it's to show that the Chachomim, no matter where they are, they could be in the marketplace, they'll talk Torah.
Ah, okay. See, Daddy, if we're all like you, we would understand that. If you stand on line in the thing and you pull out your Mishnayos out of your pocket, you understand that. The rest of us guys think. Thank you for explaining it. That's exactly, which by the way, that's exactly what he does. My father, he's going to get embarrassed. He has this little pocket Mishnayos in his thing, and he's got it worked out that if you do a parak and a half every day, you can finish Shisha the Mishnah in a year. Anyways, and that's what he does. He waits online in the grocery store, he pulls it out. That's what he does. All right, halavai of the rest of us. Amalei, masnisin mai. What is the meaning of our Mishnah? How do we reconcile these two laws? Amalei, he said exactly like we said Rabbi Hu. Reisha ba'oike v'sefer b'tar. The first part where he switches the shame of the Pesach for a Shlomim is where he does it deliberately. Everybody says it's chayiv. The Sefer B'Tor, and the Sefer is where he switches the Shlomim to a Pesach that was inadvertent. He woke up and he said, it's Erev Pesach. So everybody taking kabbanis. He grabbed his animal and he brought it as a carbon. Tanya Minei Avar Zimnin, Rabbi Yitzchak learned this with Rabbi Avu 40 times. V'domilei command Menocha b'kisei. And it was like to him like something that he has in his pocket. In other words, he got it very clear in his mind. And again, it's this Mishnah, because this Mishnah really is not clear at all. Now, in fact, now the Gemara says, that's very nice that you learned it 40 times. And so we're saying that the Reisha is where he did it on purpose, and the Sefer is where he made a mistake. Switch up. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer said, Ma in Pesach shemut lishmod. Now, even in the case of a Pesach, which is mutter to bring on Shabbos if you bring it l'shem Pesach, kishiyishina es shemoy, but if you switch its name to a shlomim chayiv, then zevachim shehem asur lishmam, then all other sacrifices, which you're not allowed to bring on Shabbos, if they're wrong, you're not allowed to bring a shlomim for the name of a shlomim on Shabbos. Then certainly if you change its name, I don't care even if you change its name to a Pesach, in Shul Chayiv, right? The im Isa, but if it's true that the two parts of the Mishnah are actually dealing with two different cases, one where the beginning, where you switched it from a Pesach to a Shlom, you did it deliberately, but the one that you switched from a Shlomim to a Pesach, you did inadvertently. The Reisha ba'oika b'sefer b'tah, we're on 72A2, right? If you're dealing with both, then you don't have a kal v'chaymer, you don't have a fortuitous argument, because you're not dealing with apples to apples, you're dealing with apples to oranges. Says the Gemara, which we already explained, Rabbi Eliezer lo shanalei. Rabbi Eliezer says there's no difference. I don't care if you made a mistake in halacha by switching it deliberately from a Pesach to a shlomim, thinking that just because I was allowed to bring this animal as a Pesach, I'm allowed to bring it as a shlomim on Shabbos, which is halacha. Or the other half, where I inadvertently switched my shlomim to a Pesach because everybody was bringing the carbon Pesach. That's Dvar mitzvah. You mean to do the mitzvah of the day. Rabbi Eliezer says, you made a mistake, I don't care if it's in halacha, I don't care if it's in the doing of the mitzvah, it don't matter. You made a mistake, you got to bring a chatas. He doesn't care. So for him, it doesn't matter whether the first part of the Mishnah is on purpose and the second half of the Mishnah is in it unintentional. Either way, he says it all evens out, and therefore I can say my kal b'chayim. Rabbi Yeshua, but according to Rabbi Yeshua, the Shani lay, Rabbi Yeshua says there is a difference. When you tor b'dvar halachim, the Reisha Rabbi Yeshua agreed that you're chayiv. When you switch the Pesach deliberately to a shlomim and thinking that you were allowed to bring it also on Shabbos, even Rabbi Yeshua says you have to bring a carbon chatas, you have to bring a sin offering. But Rabbi Yeshua says in the Sefer, when you tor b'dvar mitzvah, when you inadvertently bring a shlomim for a Pesach, since you're doing the mitzvah of the day of the Pesach, you're potter. Right? He should have answered up Rabbi Eliezer in this manner, but he doesn't. If you look in our Mishnah, he goes ahead and the answer is completely different. So why does he do it this way? And says the Gemara, that's exactly what Rabbi Yeshua actually means in our Mishnah. Hachi kamala, lididi to me, loydami. There's no comparison. Reisha ba'oika v'sefer b'tar. In the Reisha, he deliberately switched it from a Pesach to a Shlomim, and I say is Chayiv v'kachatas. In the Sefer, he inadvertently switched it from a Shlomim to a Pesach, and it's only Torah b'dvar mitzvah, and he's potter. But Lidi Doch, you Rabbi Yossi, and you Rabbi Eliezer, who's even according to you, I'm going to tell you that your kal v'chayim still doesn't work. Lord. In the case of Pesach, where you switch its name from a Pesach, which was mutter to bring on Shabbos, to a Shlomim, which is also to bring on Shabbos, then how are you going to compare it to a Zevach, to another sacrifice, which in and of itself, for its name, a Shlomim, you're not allowed to bring on Shabbos, but you've now switched its name, to a Pesach, which you are allowed to bring on Shabbos. So again, it's apples and oranges. You can't make a comparison. I don't understand. So now, the Mishnah went further. Amalai 72A2, the right-hand column. Amalai Rabbi Eliezer, Imurei Tzibur Yechiach. He said, the communal offerings, the two carbon karmins, and the two carbon musifs that you were allowed to bring on Shabbos because Zaman Kavua, the time established it, the carbon tamid of the morning and the evening are brought every single day, tamid, always. And the Musafim, the Torah says, V'yayim HaShabbos, Shnei Chavasim, remember, V'yayim HaShabbos, Shnei Chavasim B'nei Shana, Tamimim, you have to bring two extra Musafim. The Torah commands it. So he says like this, Imur Tzibur Yechiach, Shehein Mutar Lishma. because they are allowed to be brought on Shabbos for their own name, for the name of a Talmud, and the name of the Musaf. But if you take another carbon that was put aside for a Shlomim, and you switch it with Shmon, and you say, ooh, I'm going to bring it for the Musaf. So do you see that even though you're switching it from the name of Shlomim, which was not allowed to be brought, to the name of a carbon tzibur, the Talmud of the Musaf that you are allowed to bring on Shabbos, and im kozeh, yechayev, even though you bring Torah b'dvar mitzvah, you bring Torah b'dvar mitzvah. Amalei Rabbi Yeshua loy, ima marti b'emurei tzibur sheken yesh lem kitzvah. How could you bring it from the communal kabbanis, of which there are only 4 the entire day? You only bring 4. The 2 bookends, the 2 talmuds of the morning and the evening, and the 2 musafim in the middle. Right? Time of Pesach shein like kitzvah. Jerry's point of view from yesterday, carbon Pesach, on which there were millions and millions and millions. It's very easy to get mixed up. You get so confused in the tumult. You can imagine what the tumult was like in about a 4.5-hour period to check millions of kabbalas. Says the Gemara, L'meima, are you really coming to tell me? The chol heicha, the islay kitzvah, mechayiv Rabbi Yeshua. The Yeshua agrees that wherever the mitzvah has a limit, i.e., the kabbanis of Shabbos, where you can only bring 4 kabbanis, right? That in such a case, Rabbi Yeshua agrees that you shouldn't have made a mistake. But we have a case, and this is fascinating. I will bring you the case of children, of babies that need to be circumcised, need to have their bris milah on the Shabbos. For an example, me, I was born on Shabbos, my bris was on Shabbos, right? But there's a limit. It's not, and yet we learned, because there's only one baby. It's one baby, that's it. But listen to what we learned. One had 2 babies to give the bris milah to circumcise. One to circumcise after the Shabbos. And one to circumcise on the Shabbos. Somebody had twins. The first baby was born before Matzah Shabbos. The second baby was born after Matzah Shabbos. The baby that was born on Matzah Shabbos, the bris was next Shabbos. The baby born after Matzah Shabbos, the bris is the next Sunday. And guess what? He forgot which one was born first. And he went ahead and he circumcises the Sunday baby on Shabbos. So he does it early. When you do it early, it's not called a circumcision. Because when does the circumcision have to happen? B'yom hashvini, on the 8th day. If it happens on the 7th day, it's not a bris milah. Chayiv, you are chayiv. Now here's the problem. You're chayiv, but the truth of the matter is you did a bris milah. What's this kid supposed to do? He's now gemalat. We're going to tackle that in a minute. The fact is, the kid now is circumcised. That's it. He is circumcised, right? He was circumcised early, but he's now circumcised. So now what's the story with this kid? Okay? But right now, you're chayiv. You're chayiv because you inadvertently were over on Shabbos. You're only allowed to, just like the carbon Pesach is Doicha Shabbos, because it's the mitzvah, say the positive commandment that if you don't do it, you chayiv kares. The same thing, bris milah is the only other mitzvah, say positive commandment that if you don't do it, you chayiv kares. So therefore, if the 8th day falls out on Shabbos, we hold that you could go ahead and you could do the bris milah on the 8th day. So now we're already on 72.8.3.
So wait a second. So isn't he making a tar with var mitzvah?
With var mitzvah. Yes, right. And it's still chayiv. Very good, Charlie. Right. Until you put your finger right on it, he's tar with var mitzvah because he thinks he's making the circumcision. However, he didn't do the circumcision. The difference, Charlie, very important.
Yeah, because it wasn't allowed.
He's doing it on the right day. Here he's doing it on the wrong day, so he actually accomplished really nothing.
Right.
As opposed to the carbon basic, where he certainly accomplished something. Echad. So now, or we have another case. We're on 72A3. Echad l'moiloi be'erev Shabbos. If you have two babies, one that needed to be circumcised on Friday, the twins, one was born on Erev Shabbos. The Echad l'moiloi b'Shabbos, the second baby was actually born after your wife lit candles, right? After we said Mizmor Shiliyam Shabbos, so the second baby was born on Shabbos. V'shachach, and he messes up b'moles shel Erev Shabbos b'Shabbos. Now, he takes the Erev Shabbos, the one who was supposed to get his bris on Friday. Day 8 was Friday, and instead he does the bris milah on day 9. So now he did the mitzvah. It is a bris. He did the mitzvah, but he's not supposed to do it because once you blow the 8th day, what's the din if the baby is yellow and you can't do it on the 8th day? Do we do it on Shabbos? If Shabbos and then no, we don't. We push it off. Once you push it off to a weekday. So here it got pushed off from the Friday for whatever reason. He forgot. Now he did it on Shabbos, so it's a real bris milah. But the problem is he did it on Shabbos. So this is really our classic case of the Korban Pesach. The same case. B'shachach u'moles shel erev Shabbos b'Shabbos, Rabbi Eliezer mechayev chatas. Rabbi Eliezer is mechayev chatas because Rabbi Eliezer says, I don't care what the mistake is, it's a mistake. Rabbi Yeshua Potter. Now to read directly from the art scroll because I can't do better with it. Now in this case, the circumciser, that means the moil, knew that there was only one infant for him to circumcise on the Shabbos. And yet Rabbi Yeshua exempts him from a chatas because he erred while attempting to perform a mitzvah. We see that Rabbi Yeshua exempts even when there's a limit. There's only 2 babies. Like if the kabbanis, there were 4 kabbanis on Shabbos, 2 tamids and 2 musafim. And Rabbi Yeshua agreed where there's a limit, where there's a kitzvah, right? If you make a mistake, you shouldn't have made a mistake. He's dealing with how many babies? We're only dealing with 2 babies. Right? And Rabbi Yeshua is letting him off the hook. He's being completely inconsistent. Good question. Amar Rav Ami, where first he went and he circumcised the Friday baby on Shabbos. So that means the milah is good, but he was over on Shabbos because you weren't, once you blew the 8th day, you weren't supposed to come out, you weren't supposed to do the circumcision on Shabbos. But the circumcision is a circumcision. The Shabbos, the Tariba. But at that time, on Shabbos, there's still the other baby. Remember, there was a Friday baby and a Shabbos baby. He went ahead and blew it. And he didn't do anything on Friday, the next Friday. He did it on Shabbos. He circumcised the Friday baby. But the fact is, there's still a Shabbos baby to do, whose day is today. So therefore, there's still a smell in the air of the mitzvah that is allowed to be done on Shabbos. There, Rabbi Yeshua says, okay, I'm allowing you potter. Because the mitzvah is still in existence, the Shabbos baby still needs its circumcision on Shabbos. The fact that you blew it with the other baby, but the mitzvah is still here. Since the mitzvah is still here, you're okay. You're not supposed to do it, but I'm not going to hit you with a carbon. But in our case, in a case where he went ahead and slaughtered the communal offerings, the carbon sebers first. He first slaughtered the carbon tamid. He first slaughtered the musaf. And then he decided to bring his shlamim, and he says, oh, I'm going to bring the shlamim for a musaf. Right? Since those were already brought, so the mitzvah was used up. The mitzvah is used up since the carbon tamids that you're allowed to bring on Shabbos were already brought. The musafim that you're allowed to bring on Shabbos were already brought. Since they were already brought, there's no mitzvah left. So when you go ahead and your mind goes out of you blow it in your mind, and you bring one of your animals to bring as a tamid or as a musaf, they were already, the mitzvah of the day was already taken care of, it's gone. So in such a case, Rabbi Yehuda would agree, Rabbi Yeshua would agree that you have to bring a carbon chatas. So pray to Gemara. Now, Charlie, we come to your Rameir. Okay, Charlie, here we go. If our Mishnah is dealing in a case where the communal offerings, the carbon tziburs, which the Mishnah called a murei tzibur for some strange reason, carbon tzibur were brought before you made your mistake and brought your carbon, thinking for a carbon tzibur. Rameya, what did Rameya say? Which Charlie pointed out to us, he was the big lenient one. Even if one slaughters other zevachim, other sacrifices, he slaughters it for these carpets, he slaughters it as a tamid or a musaf, it's okay, you're off the hook, you don't have to bring a carbon chatas, you don't have to bring a sin offering according to Reb Meir. Afal Gab, are we saying that Reb Meir is saying this? Afal Gab, the Kodev B'Shach, Tinui Le'emumi Tziru B'Reisha, even though you already took care of the mitzvahs of the day, you shechted all the tamids, you already slaughtered all the musafim, and you're left with no more carbons to bring, and now you're bringing, your mind went on a brain freeze, and you went in and you brought your shlamim for a musaf. Even there, Rabbi Yossi is going to say you're off the hook. But Tanam we learn, Rabbi Chia me'Abel Arab, Rabbi Chia from the town of Abel Arab, taught in a brayso. Amar Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says, "Loi nechleku Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yeshua are not arguing. Al shahayu loi shnei tinaikis concerning the case who has two infants. 72A4, 72A4. We're at the bottom of the Amid. Echad limol erev Shabbos, ve'echad limol b'Shabbos. One who needs to be circumcised, gemalit on Erev Shabbos, and one who needs to gemalit on Shabbos. V'shachach, and he makes a mistake, Shabbos, and he doesn't do anything on Friday, and he first goes ahead, and he mals, and he circumcises the 9-day-old baby. He does it on Shabbos, so the meal is a good meal, but he was supposed to have waited until Sunday, the chayiv, that everybody agrees that he's chayiv. And what did they disagree? Al shahayu loy shnei tinaikis. We have two children. One is needed to be gemalit on Sunday. The echel b'Shabbos, one needed to be gemalit on Shabbos. So one kid was born before Matzah Shabbos, and one kid was born after Matzah Shabbos. And he goes ahead and he malos the Sunday baby. He malos him on the 7th day on Shabbos. The Rabbi Elazar B'chayev Chatas, Rabbi Yeshua Poiter, Rabbi Yeshua is Poiter. But you see, but Rameh, so now we have to understand this. Rameh, who says he's liable in the first case of the Brisa, that once the mitzvah obligation is fulfilled, and no one is genuinely being preoccupied with the mitzvah, Rabbi Elazar holds one is liable, because that was the first case. Amar Rab Meir, lo nechleku Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yeshua, al shahayu shnei tinaikis echad l'mol erev Shabbos, echad l'mol b'Shabbos, sheshachad l'mol es shel erev Shabbos, b'Shabbos techayiv, that you chayiv. Why you chayiv? Because that's it, you blew it. So he holds, even though this thing, so how can we say that Rab Meir exempts somebody? Where you already brought the communal offerings, you already brought the Talmud and the Musaf, and before we said, and if afterwards you bring your animal as a Musaf, you're off the hook. You see over here, that's not the case, but the and the Gemara, which everybody should have asked for Tispera, this whole Baraisa is shver. Ma hasam d'loy obed mitzvah pater Rabbi Yeshua. In the second case, look at the second case. The second case was, Shayu, there were two children. One was a Sunday baby, one was a Shabbos baby. And he went ahead and he circumcised the Sunday baby on Shabbos, which means that there was no mitzvah that happened because the Sunday baby needed it wasn't the 8th day, it was the 7th day. It was the 7th. On the 7th day, it wasn't a circumcision, right? So, and what does Rabbi Yeshua? This says, Paiter. Then you're going to tell me in the first case on Shabbos, where he's doing a mitzvah, where he's circumcised the Friday baby on Shabbos, which means that the Mila is a good Mila because the 8th day already passed, right? Shouldn't have done it on Shabbos. There he's chayiv. And in the other case where there is no mitzvah because it's only the 7th day, he's potter. So this
Makes
whole
no
brisa
sense.
doesn't make any sense. We have to understand this right. So now I go to this. Ratio, the beginning part of the brisa is Kegoin shekodam umol shel Shabbos erev Shabbos. With the bright year, he went ahead and circumcised the Shabbos baby on Friday. So he did the Shabbos baby on the seventh day, which is not a circumcision. Okay, on the seventh day. Now we're on the top of Amud Beis. Shaloi nitna Shabbos l'dochos. So now, since this baby, which was the Shabbos baby, had his circumcision on the seventh day, the fact of the matter is he's malad. He's circumcised. It happened on the seventh day, right? It happened on the seventh day, but he's malad, which means that now on Shabbos there's no baby available to have a milo. Because the other baby is a Sunday baby. The other baby is a Sunday baby. And the Shabbos baby was already circumcised on Friday too early. So Shabbos is a completely empty vessel. It's an empty vessel. Rabbi Yeshua says that Yechayev, if you do something on it, there's no mitzvah on that day at all. So now it's not a Torah b'dvar mitzvah, it's a Torah b'dvar halacha. You made a complete mistake. No good. Masha'enke b'sefer nos no Shabbos l'doicha etzla. The sefer, because the Shabbos baby is still here, its milah needs to still happen. Therefore, the mitzvah is still hanging around. And therefore, hacha in our Mishnah, harei nitne Shabbos l'doicha l'etzla carbon tzibur. Since the Shabbos was given over to be pushed off for the carbon seaboards, how was it pushed off for the carbon seaboards? Because you're allowed to bring the carbon tamid and the musaf on Shabbos, since you're allowed to. The fact is, once you're allowed to, that's open. We opened the door to be doicha Shabbos for those kavanas. If you make a mistake, and even after the fact, says Rameya, you bring the carbon, it's okay, it's fine. Now, the only question here is what I just said to you all before. When you take an 8th day baby that's supposed to get his bris on Shabbos, and you do it on Sunday, you do it on Friday, well, you did it on the 7th day. That's not called a circumcision. Circumcision begins on day 8. So how could the Gemara start in the first words on this Amid, Shloi Nikne Shabbos Litchos? That's not true. That baby that got circumcised on the 7th day, something needs to be done with him on the 8th day. Because he didn't really have a bris milah. Yes, he's circumcised, but it's not a real circumcision, because the real circumcision only starts on day 8. So I asked this question to my rabbi in Brooklyn.
He's not
known as the semi-higher.
That's a toughest dam bris, is not doicha Shabbos.
Oh, very good. So what? That's the same answer. You just gave the same answer, Daddy, as the semi-higher did.
No.
Because the rule is, even if somebody is circumcised, when the day 8 comes, you have to do something called hatofas dam bris. You have to let out someone. So for an example, I have a friend, Shmuley Rimmer. His son was born circumcised. So Rab Ham, Zechain Lebracha, my Rosh Hashiva, told him, you don't even make a bracha. You fake it. You got it on the 8th day. He went Baruch Atah Alamilo. He didn't say the shame of Hashem or Malchus. Really like that. So everybody thought he did, because nobody needed to know his business. And all they did was, they took out a little blood. Topas Blam Bris. Hatopas Dam Bris is not Doicha the Shabbos. This baby, even though he wasn't born circumcised, since the fact of the matter is he's now circumcised, the only thing that you could do with him is Hatopas Dam Bris, to take out a little blood on the 8th day. Since that's all you could do with it, he has the same rules as a child that was born circumcised, and those are not Doicha Shabbos. Daddy,
let me ask you a question.
Yes.
So they picked the wrong baby to do the bris milah on Shabbos.
Right.
What's about the baby that was the right baby to do the bris milah?
So theoretically, they could do it on Shabbos. But if you went ahead and you botched it, then you'll do it the next day. The baby that's supposed to be should have been done. That's correct. The guy got so confused.
So I understand, but I mean, there's nothing wrong with it doing the second bris milah on the right person.
Not just nothing wrong. You're supposed to. Exactly. And in fact, that's what the Gemara is coming to say, Charlie. If that baby is still in existence, then the mitzvah is still there. So Rabbi Yeshua says, and Rameh says,
you're still there. But the mitzvah is still there. And maybe by not doing it, the mitzvah is still there. But by doing it, the mitzvah is gone.
But if you had gone ahead and done the circumcision of the right baby first, and then you turned around and did the second one, then there was no mitzvah, and you have to bring a carbon. Exactly.
But what's about all the babies in the world that need to have their bris milah on Shabbos?
Very good. Patience. Amalei Rav Ashi Rav Kahana. Go ahead. Amalei Rav Ashi Rav Kahana. I'm sorry. Amalei Rav Ashi and Rav Charlie. Rav Kahana. Okay. Hachanami Harei Mitne Shabbos Litchol Eitzel Tinaikis Ba'olma. But the Shabbos is given over for all the babies born on Shabbos in the world that need this circumcision on Shabbos. So Shabbos itself is like the kabbonis, that it's there, it's given over. Great question, Charlie. So Amalei, Rav Kahana said to Charlie and Rav Ashi, Lagabi Dahai Gabra Mias Lo Isyavi. Regarding this person, however, it was not given to be. So what we're doing, we're going to have to stop here because this took us far too long. And we're at the two dots. But I want to make a major point here. The Gemara just did something that normally we don't see. Halacha, and this is what Charlie was pointing out. Halacha is standard across the board. We have one set of halachas. We saw that by the kabbanos. The kabbanos, the carbon sibas, the communal offerings, were set in stone. We're always there. The day was given to bring to Midim and Musafim. So if you bring from the side yours, Rameh says you're off the hook. You don't have to bring a carbon. Shabbos was given over to do bris milas. The difference here is, Charlie, that's a carbon sibur, a communal offering. A communal offering is always there. We all own it. Your child, you're mechuyev to bemala your child. I am not. I am only become mechuyev if you, the father, don't circumcise your kid. Then Bezdin needs to step in. Then the rest of us need to step in. But on the day of the 8th day, the rest of us don't have a mitzvah to circumcise your child. You have a mitzvah to circumcise your child. That is a huge difference. Now, if you have the time here for 2 minutes, I'll just show you where this is different. We have a rule. Rab shemoichel al kavayde is kavayde mochel. A Rebbe who's mochel forgives his honor is forgiven. The Rambam, the Maimonides, puts in one extra word. He says, Rav Hamuvik, your number one Rebbe, your closest Rebbe, the Rav, let's say, for those who were connected to Rav Soloveitchik, right? Or my father, let's say Rav Gedalia Shul, right? Rav Hamuvik, comes the Brisker Rav Zechain Levrach, and I'm only saying this because the Brisker Rav's last living son was one of the 3 Gedolim who were nifta yesterday. As you know, Rabbi Twersky was nifta yesterday. Rabbi Soloveitchik, Rav David Soloveitchik, the youngest son of the Brisker Rav of the Griz, was nifta yesterday, and Rav Yitzchak Shiner was nifter. Rav Yitzchak Shiner was a musbach of Tarvadas about 10 years or so before my father. Right, he's one from the famous Shiner family of Tarvadas, and he was nifter. He was the Rosh Yeshiva in Kamenetz in Yerushalayim, and he was nifter. 3 all within a 24-hour period. So I'm saying over a Torah from the Brisker Rav, L'Zeichen Ishmas. Says the Brisker Rav, it's very simple. There's one halacha that says all Talmidei Chachamim, globally, communally, you have to respect. The respect is not in the specific person. It's global. Every time you see a learned guy in a Wadet, you have to give him respect. You have to stand up. Dalet Amos, 4 cubic feet, you have to stand up. That honor is not in a specific person. That's globally in all Talmidei Chachamim. Masha'en Kain, your Rebbe Muvik. For you, he's your Rebbe Muvik. Rabbi Soloveitchik from YU, Rabbi Yosef Ber was your Rebbe Muvik. He wasn't my Rebbe Muvik. So you actually had to stand up, Malay Einov, as long as you can see him, even if he's all the way on the other side of the auditorium, you still have to stand. Since that extra honor is tied to this specific person, that honor, he can go ahead and but the other honor of standing up 4 feet, right? That he can't be moichel, because that's not his, that's globally. So for an example, we know the rule is, Ab shemoichel al kavode is kavode moichel. A father that forgives on his honor is forgiven. How does that work? Because my father is my father. I have the mitzvah to honor him. The next guy, it's not his father. He has a chiyuv to honor his father. So the rule of honoring is an individual thing, me to him and him to me. So he can go ahead and forgive his honor. However, you should know, the Darkei Moshe says, not completely. Because who's commanded? I'm commanded to honor my father. So how can my father come and say, I forgive your commandment? It's not his commandment to forgive. God commanded me in the 10 commandments to honor my father. My father doesn't get a choice to whether to say he wants to be honored or not honored. I can't just sit in his seat or call him by his first name just because he says it's okay to do, right? Like they do today in America, they try to be friends. The Torah doesn't want you to be friends with your parents. Parents are supposed to be friendly, not friends, right? That's the point. So it says the Darkei Moshe, a father can be moichel on his covered. That doesn't mean that you're not allowed to get, you still have to give honor to your father. In other words, he could say, you don't have to give me, the rule is if your father asks for something and somebody else asks for something, you have to give your father first. He's allowed to say you can give the other guy first. That's okay. But sitting in his chair and that, so everything is limited. The answer to your question, Charlie, which is a great question, the karbonos, the sacrifices on Shabbos belong to all of us. They're tzibur, communal. That's great, like this. You can't do away with it. The bris milah, circumcision, even though it's Shabbos is given over Shabbos is given over to do circumcision when you need to do it. So truth of the matter is, it's open. It's only open on an individual basis. And that is a fundamental difference in halacha that applies in many, many, many places throughout. And as always I say this, when you look at halacha, you need to think about the theory behind the halacha. Anyways, everybody have a wonderful day. It is great to be back. It is great to be learning again. I'm sorry that it's taking far too long, but these are really hard Gemaras.